Imagine a dinner table. It's Thanksgiving or maybe just a Sunday roast. There's an empty chair. It's not empty because someone couldn't make the flight or because they're working late. It's empty because of a conversation that happened 3 months ago. Maybe it was about an election. Maybe it was about a vaccination status. Maybe, believe it or not, it started over a football game and spiraled into something personal. We are living in an era where that empty chair is becoming the most common piece of furniture in the American home. We've all felt it. The walking on eggshells, the mute buttons on social media, the friendships that just quietly dissolve. Today, we're tackling a text that claims we've traded connection for conflict, and we're going to find out if we can ever trade it back.
It's a heavy image to start with, Noah, but you're right. The data backs up that feeling of emptiness. There was a report from Time magazine and the American Psychiatric Association recently that noted roughly 1 in 5 Americans are now estranged from a family member specifically due to political disagreements. That's 20% of us losing family over opinions.
20%. That is staggering. And frankly, it's depressing. So let's get into this. We received a text, a really thoughtful reflection actually, about how differences have mutated into divisions. The core argument here is that we've stopped trying to understand people and started trying to defeat them. We treat conversations like court cases, where the goal is a guilty verdict.
Right, and the text highlights something crucial, the shift from disagreement to disrespect. It mentions not just politics, but sports teams and personal styles. It implies that the mechanism for hating a rival sports fan is uncomfortably similar to how we treat political opponents.
Is it, though? Because hating the New York Yankees feels like good, clean fun. Hating someone because of how they voted feels existential. Are those really the same thing in our brains?
Surprisingly, yes. Psychologically, they're practically identical. It comes down to something called social identity theory, which was developed back in the 1970s by Henri Tajfel and John Turner. The basic idea is that a huge part of our self-esteem is wrapped up in the groups we belong to. So when you criticize my political party or my favorite football team, my brain doesn't hear, I disagree with your policy preference. My brain hears, you are stupid and bad.
So it's an attack on me, not the idea.
Exactly. It triggers a defensive response. In sports psychology, we see a phenomena called burging, basking in reflected glory. When our team wins, we won, we did it. But when they lose, we distance ourselves. Politics has become a team sport, where we don't just want our side to win, we need the other side to be humiliated to validate our own identity.
Which leads to what the text calls proving people wrong. The writer says, real growth never comes from winning an argument. It comes from listening without preparing a rebuttal. That hit me hard. Listening without preparing a rebuttal. I think I do that maybe 5% of the time.
You're in the majority there. Most of us listen to respond, not to understand. But there's a technical term for what's happening in our culture right now that explains why this is so hard. It's called affective polarization.
Affective with an A, like affection?
Yes, but the lack thereof. Researchers like Shanto Iyengar at Stanford have been tracking this. There are 2 types of polarization. Ideological polarization is when we disagree on the issues, tax rates, foreign policy. That's actually not that high in some areas. But affective polarization is the tendency to view opposing partisans negatively and co-partisans positively. It's an emotional divide. We don't just disagree with them, we dislike them. We think they are morally bankrupt.
That feels right. It's not you're wrong about the tax code. It's you're a bad person for thinking that about the tax code.
Precisely. And when you view someone as a bad person, curiosity dies. You don't ask a villain why they're villainous, you just try to defeat them. The text we're discussing suggests a remedy. Lead with curiosity, not judgment. But that is incredibly hard to do when your brain is screaming that the person across from you is a threat.
Okay, but I want to push back on this a little bit, because this is where I get stuck, and I think a lot of listeners get stuck. The text says, differences do not make someone the enemy. And sure, if we're talking about pizza toppings or the Red Sox, fine. But what if the difference is about my fundamental rights? What if the opinion is that my existence is invalid? Asking me to be curious about someone who thinks I shouldn't exist, isn't that asking a bit much?
This is the hardest part of the conversation, Noah, and you are absolutely right to identify that tension. There is a concept called the paradox of tolerance. Should we tolerate intolerance? But let's look at the goal here. If the goal is to protect yourself, then yes, boundaries are necessary. Estrangement is sometimes the healthy choice.
Right, safety first.
But if the goal is change, if the goal is to actually shift that person's harmful worldview, then shouting at them or isolating them almost never works. The text suggests we separate people from positions. That doesn't mean excusing the position. It means recognizing that the person holding that position arrived there through a complex story of fear, upbringing, and misinformation.
So digging into the why might actually dismantle the what.
It's the only thing that does. There's a fascinating psychological concept called the contact hypothesis, proposed by Gordon Allport way back in the 1950s. The theory, which has been validated by hundreds of studies since, is that prejudice is reduced when we have meaningful face-to-face contact with members of the outgroup. But here's the kicker. It works best when you're working toward a common goal.
So arguing on Facebook comments is not that.
Facebook is the anti-contact hypothesis. It removes the human face and leaves only the abstract opinion. When the text says love outlives opinions, it's tapping into the reality that it's much harder to hate a person who helped you change a flat tire, even if they vote differently than you. When we isolate ourselves in echo chambers, we lose those moments of friction that actually humanize the enemy.
I like that phrase, moments of friction. It sounds uncomfortable, but maybe necessary. The text also mentions intellectual humility. It says you don't have to be right to be kind. But there's actually some science on this too, isn't there? Being humble isn't just a nice character trait, it's a cognitive tool.
Huge. Intellectual humility is essentially the recognition that the things you believe might be wrong. And studies, including recent work from the University of Michigan, show that people who score high on intellectual humility have better relationships and are more effective at conflict resolution. It's not about being unsure of your values. It's about owning the limits of your knowledge.
Give me an example. How does that sound in a conversation?
Okay, instead of saying you're wrong because the data says X, an intellectually humble approach is, I've always looked at the data this way and it leads me to this conclusion, but I'm curious, what evidence are you looking at that leads you somewhere else?
See, that sounds so reasonable when you say it, but in the heat of the moment, my ego wants to slam the data on the table like a winning hand in poker.
That's the dopamine head of winning. But remember the text, conversations today aren't conversations, they're debates designed to win. If you win the debate but lose the relationship, what have you actually gained? You get a momentary ego boost and you lose a connection to a human being. The text is arguing that the cost-benefit analysis there is way off.
It's trading a long-term asset, the relationship, for a short-term high. It's bad emotional economics.
That is a perfect way to put it. Bad emotional economics. And look at the cultural legacy of this. We are losing what sociologists call third places. Places that aren't work and aren't home. Churches, bowling leagues, community centers. These were the places where that contact hypothesis used to happen naturally. You'd bowl alongside the guy who voted for the other candidate. Now we sort ourselves. We move to neighborhoods that vote like us. We watch news that agrees with us. We are curating our lives to avoid the very discomfort that leads to growth.
And that curation is making us fragile. If I never encounter a differing opinion, the moment I do, it feels like violence. So the text gives us a roadmap: curiosity, separating people from positions, empathy over ego. Let's get practical for a second. Tomorrow, a listener is at work, and a colleague says something that makes their blood boil. What is the literal first step? Because choose empathy is great advice, but how do I physically do that when I'm angry?
The first step is physiological. Your amygdala, the threat center of your brain, has just fired. You are in fight or flight. You need to engage the prefrontal cortex, the logic center. The best way to do that is to ask a question. Not a trap question, but a genuine one.
Like what?
That's a really strong perspective. What experiences in your life led you to feel that way?
Oh, that's good, because it moves it from facts, which we can argue about all day, to experience, which is irrefutable. I can't tell you your experience didn't happen.
Exactly. You're asking for the story, not the statistic. The text says every mindset has a story behind it. When you ask for the story, you turn an adversary into a narrator. It disarms them. They expect you to attack their point. Instead, you're asking about their life. It changes the geometry of the conversation.
It creates that space the text talks about. Space for healing. It sounds almost too soft for the hard times we're in, but maybe it's the only thing strong enough to work.
Soft skills are often the hardest to master, And look, this doesn't mean you surrender your beliefs. You can still fight for what you believe in, but you don't have to destroy the person in front of you to do it. The text ends with this powerful idea. Love is always stronger than division. That's not just a poetic sentiment, it's an evolutionary truth. We survived as a species because we cooperated, not because we polarized.
It's a reminder that the person standing in front of us matters more than the abstract idea we're fighting over. That empty chair at the dinner table, maybe it doesn't have to stay empty.
It doesn't, but filling it requires us to put down the gavel and pick up a question.
We'll leave it there. If this conversation sparked something for you, maybe a name popped into your head, someone you've written off, consider sending this episode to a friend, or maybe even to them. Thanks for listening.